Hey guys, tonight we're heading back through the dusty alleyways and sun-baked fields of the Ottoman Empire, where the scent of roasted lamb barely masks the stench of overflowing latrines, and every silver coin you earn seems to vanish into a tax collector's purse. Picture this: you're standing in a patchy tunic, squinting into the Anatolian sun, because you've just learned that your barley crop, your goat, and even your bees are taxable. That's right, even. The buzzing little guys aren't safe from the Sultan's long, greedy fingers. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a peasant in the Ottoman countryside, maybe in Rumelia, maybe way out in Anatolia. Either way, you're at the bottom of the pyramid. The state's authority presses down from the top like a stone slab, and your shoulders are what's holding it up. The system is feudal, but with Ottoman flair, the Timar system. Basically, a sipahi, cavalryman, gets land not to own, but to collect taxes from in exchange for military service. Which sounds fine until you realize what that means for you. You owe labor, produce, and coin. Sometimes, all three. You plow the fields, harvest the grain, then hand over a share so large it feels like you're working for free. And don't even think about complaining. That's a fast track to a flogging or worse. Here's a fun twist. You're also taxed on things you don't own. Shadow taxes were a thing, yes, literally. Taxes based on the assumption of what a household should have. Got no oxen? Tough. You might still be taxed as if you do. Historians still argue whether these exaggerated phantom assets were calculated for corruption's sake or just bureaucratic laziness. Either way, you pay up. And then there's the avariz. Oh, the dreaded avariz, the emergency tax that was supposed to be temporary but showed up more often than your cousin's bad poetry at weddings. War breaks out on the Hungarian front? You pay avariz. The janissaries demand a raise? Avariz. The Sultan wants a new fountain complex? Avariz again. Temporary in name, eternal in practice. Let's say your village is lucky enough to avoid conscription this year. Even then, you might still owe in-kind taxes sending hay, dried figs, or chickens to the nearest garrison. And naturally, the transport is on you. So now you're trudging through muddy paths, carting goods with a mule that's older than your grandfather, and about twice as stubborn. But taxes don't just come from the state. Religious taxes are another burden. If you're Christian or Jewish under Ottoman rule, you're a dhimmi, protected but definitely second-class citizen. That means you pay the jizya, a head tax. And while in theory this guarantees you freedom of religion and protection, in practice it's just one more layer of your income being peeled away. Even Muslims aren't spared. You pay zakat, the alms tax, and often local imams or village elders skim off a bit more to help the poor, which somehow always means their cousin's family. You're essentially bleeding coinage from every direction, and the irony is that coins themselves are often in short supply. Much of your economy runs on barter, favours, and IOUs. Yet somehow, the taxman always wants silver. And if you're wondering how they keep track of all this, enter the Defterth Ottoman Tax Register, a marvel of paperwork and precision. The scribes write down everything: your name, land, livestock, family members, debts, even personal quirks. You sneezed during prayer once in 1572? That's in there. Okay, maybe not, but it feels that way. The bureaucracy is immense, and its reach terrifying. Missing an entry means either freedom or double taxation, depending on which official finds out. Sometimes, tax collectors don't even wait for the official cycle. Armed enforcers, often backed by the sipahi or local aga, show up early and strong-arm you into giving more just in case. There's a story part folklore, part likely fact-off collectors in Bosnia, demanding tax payments in pine nuts, and then flipping out when the nuts weren't shelled. Guess who got punished? Not the guys with the swords, I'll tell you that. Even weddings aren't safe. There are fees for marriage licenses, for circumcision feasts, even for hosting guests during holidays. Want to celebrate your daughter's engagement with some baklava and dancing? Sure, but expect to see a stern-faced official at your gate the next morning, palm outstretched, asking for his share of the fun. And if all else fails, the state auctions off your future. In some towns, Local tax farms are sold to the highest bidder, a system called iltizam. The tax farmer, or multezim, pays up front to the government for the right to collect from your region. You can guess what happens next. He'll squeeze every drop he can from you to make a profit, and there's no appeal. If you can't pay, he takes your cow, your grain, or maybe your teenage son as an indentured servant. Oh, and let's not forget the weather. One bad harvest, just one, leaves you desperate. You still owe the same taxes, but now you're selling the thatch off your roof to make up the difference. The sipahi doesn't care that the wheat withered. The sultan doesn't care that locusts chewed your fields down to dust. Your debt is still due. Now imagine all this with tooth pain, a limp from childhood rickets, and a suspicious cough that's not going away. You live in a mud brick hut with no insulation and a door made of old fence posts. Outside, a tax agent is counting your chickens. You only have 3. He says you had 5 last year. Where did the other 2 go? You point to the sky and say, "The eagle got them." He shrugs. You still owe tax on 5. Hey guys, tonight we're heading back through the dusty alleyways and sun-baked fields of the Ottoman Empire, where the scent of roasted lamb barely masks the stench of overflowing latrines, and every silver coin you earn seems to vanish into a tax collector's purse. Picture this: you're standing in a patchy tunic, squinting into the Anatolian sun, because you've just learned that your barley crop, your goat, and even your bees are taxable. That's right, even the buzzing little guys aren't safe from the sultan's long, greedy fingers. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a peasant in the Ottoman countryside, maybe in Rumelia, maybe way out in Anatolia. Either way, you're at the bottom of the pyramid. The state's authority presses down from the top like a stone slab, and your shoulders are what's holding it up. The system is feudal, but with Ottoman flair. The Timar system. Basically, a sipahi, cavalryman, gets land not to own, but to collect taxes from in exchange for military service. Which sounds fine until you realize what that means for you. You owe labor, produce, and coin. Sometimes, all 3. You plow the fields, harvest the grain, then hand over a share so large it feels like you're working for free, and don't even think about complaining. That's a fast track to a flogging, or worse. Here's a fun twist. You're also taxed on things you don't own. Shadow taxes were a thing, yes, literally. Taxes based on the assumption of what a household should have. Got no oxen? Tough. You might still be taxed as if you do. Historians still argue whether these exaggerated phantom assets were calculated for corruption's sake or just bureaucratic laziness. Either way, you pay up. And then there's the avariz. Oh, the dreaded avariz, the emergency tax that was supposed to be temporary but showed up more often than your cousin's bad poetry at weddings. War breaks out on the Hungarian front? You pay avariz. The janissaries demand a raise? Avariz. The sultan wants a new fountain complex? Avariz again. Temporary in name, eternal in practice. Let's say your village is lucky enough to avoid conscription this year. Even then, you might still owe in-kind tax-ascending hay, dried figs, or chickens to the nearest garrison. And naturally, the transport is on you. So now you're trudging through muddy paths, carting goods with a mule that's older than your grandfather, and about twice as stubborn. But taxes don't just come from the state. Religious taxes are another burden. If you're Christian or Jewish under Ottoman rule, you're a dhimmiya protected but definitely second-class citizen. That means you pay the jizya, a head tax. And while in theory this guarantees you freedom of religion and protection, in practice it's just one more layer of your income being peeled away. Even Muslims aren't spared. You pay zakat, the alms tax, and often local imams or village elders skim off a bit more to help the poor, which somehow always means their cousin's family. You're essentially bleeding coinage from every direction, and the irony is that coins themselves are often in short supply. Much of your economy runs on barter, favours, and IOUs. Yet somehow, the taxman always wants silver. And if you're wondering how they keep track of all this, enter the Defter, the Ottoman tax register, a marvel of paperwork and precision. The scribes write down everything: your name, land, livestock, family members, debts, even personal quirks. You sneezed during prayer once in 1572? That's in there. Okay, maybe not, but it feels that way. The bureaucracy is immense, and its reach terrifying. Missing an entry means either freedom or double taxation, depending on which official finds out. Sometimes tax collectors don't even wait for the official cycle. Armed enforcers, often backed by the Sipahi or local aga, show up early and strong-arm you into giving more just in case. There's a story part folklore, part likely fact-off collectors in Bosnia, demanding tax payments in pine nuts, and then flipping out when the nuts weren't shelled. Guess who got punished? Not the guys with the swords, I'll tell you that. Even weddings aren't safe. There are fees for marriage licenses, for circumcision feasts, even for hosting guests during holidays. Want to celebrate your daughter's engagement with some baklava and dancing? Sure, but expect to see a stern-faced official at your gate the next morning, palm outstretched, asking for his share of the fun. And if all else fails, the state auctions off your future. In some towns, local tax farms are sold to the highest bidera system called iltizam. The tax farmer, or multizim, pays up front to the government for the right to collect from your region. You can guess what happens next. He'll squeeze every drop he can from you to make a profit, and there's no appeal. If you can't pay, he takes your cow, your grain, or maybe your teenage son as an indentured servant. Oh, and let's not forget the weather. One bad harvest, just one leaves you desperate. You still owe the same taxes, but now you're selling the thatch off your roof to make up the difference. The Sipahi doesn't care that the wheat withered. The Sultan doesn't care that locusts chewed your fields down to dust. Your debt is still due. Now imagine all this with tooth pain, a limp from childhood rickets, and a suspicious cough that's not going away. You live in a mud brick hut with no insulation and a door made of old fence posts. Outside, a tax agent is counting your chickens. You only have 3. He says you had 5 last year. Where did the other 2 go? You point to the sky and say, "The eagle got them." He shrugs. You still owe tax on 5. The morning sun creeps through the cracks in your mud brick window, and you wake up coughing again. It's not just the smoke from your hearth or the dust from the livestock yard, it's deeper. A heaviness in your lungs, like someone laid a stone slab across your chest overnight. You try not to think about it. Illness is a daily companion in the Ottoman Empire, and you're not wealthy enough to fight it off. Medicine here is a strange mix of tradition, experimentation, and superstition. If you're poor, and let's face it, your first stop is the village healer. She's not a licensed doctor, of course. Maybe she's a respected elder, or maybe she just owns a worn copy of Avicenna's Canon of Medicine. Her treatments range from decent herbal teas to things that would make a goat gag. You're lucky if you get dried thyme boiled into goat's milk. Less lucky, and you might be instructed to wear a dead frog on your chest to draw out the sickness. You drag yourself to the mosque courtyard, where a travelling tabib, or healer, has set up shop. He's wearing bright robes, and quoting Galen like a street poet. His assistant pulls out a brass instrument that looks more like a torture device than a tool. After some muttered prayers and a few questions about your urine colour, the verdict is clear. Excess black bile. You need a treatment of hot cupping, a diet of cucumbers, and wait for it a smear of pigeon droppings across your spine. Yes, pigeon droppings. That's not a joke. Ottoman medical texts genuinely recommend animal waste in various forms for everything from skin rashes to fevers. Historians still argue whether this was rooted in misunderstood classical theory or just desperate improvisation. But either way, you don't feel any better. You might try one of the public bath shamams. The steam helps, and the massage is relaxing, but nothing clears the infection slowly gnawing at your insides. It's tuberculosis, probably, or pleurisy, or something nameless and chronic. And if the healer doesn't kill you, the bath might. The water's been reused so many times it's practically soup, and the last guy who sat in your corner was hacking like a dying donkey. If you're wealthy and know, you're not. But let's pretend you might hire a Jewish physician educated in Spain or the Levant, trained in both Eastern and Western medical texts. These doctors sometimes pull off miracles. They might drain a wound correctly, set a broken bone without mangling it, or prescribe something resembling modern antiseptic shoni, vinegar, or alcohol-based rinses. But even then, success is rare. An infected tooth can still kill you. A bad delivery ends both mother and baby. A broken leg? If it doesn't heal right, you're crippled for life. Let's talk surgery. The Ottoman Empire has surgeons, sure, but anesthesia as we know it doesn't exist. You might get wine, maybe opium if the physician's bold, but more often you just get two assistants to hold you down while the blade goes in. Wounds are cauterized with hot irons. Dislocations are yanked back into place with ropes tied to donkeys. Your screams are considered a sign that the treatment is working. And mental illness? If you're seeing visions or having fits, the local imam might say you're possessed. In some progressive cities like Edirne, you might end up in a Bimahania mental hospital with music therapy, running water, and attempts at compassion. It sounds nice until you realize you're still behind locked doors, and the only cure for your anxiety may be scented oils or endless chanting. Then there's the plague. Oh yes, the Black Death never really left. It comes in waves, sometimes skipping a few years, then returning to wipe out entire neighborhoods. No one's quite sure how it spreads: bad air, evil spirits, dirty water, all of the above probably. Quarantine is attempted in port cities, but enforcement is spotty. If someone in your household falls ill, the authorities might nail the door shut from the outside. They call it containment. You call it a slow death. And fire. Let's not forget fire. Most homes are made of wood, packed close together, with open hearths and oil lamps swaying in the breeze. One clumsy child, one gust of wind, and the whole district burns. Hospitals are no safer. You remember the story of the infirmary in Bursahau? The wind carried flames through the tiled dome, and patients were wheeled out into the freezing night, bandages smouldering, screams echoing under the stars. They say the smoke could be seen from 3 towns away. But back to your current problem. Your cough's not getting better. You haven't kept food down in 2 days. You'd see a better doctor if you could afford the travel. But the roads are mud pits and bandits aren't rare. You decide to pray. Not because you expect a miracle, but because your neighbor swears he once cured a toothache with a verse from the Quran whispered into olive oil. Your wife brings you a concoction of cinnamon, rose water, and vinegar. It tastes like regret, but she says it helped her uncle once. You nod, drink it, and smile for her sake. She's trying. Everyone's always trying. And here's the strangest part. Despite it all, people survive. Somehow, they live into their 50s, 60s even. If they're careful and lucky, maybe their immune systems are tougher than yours. Maybe their bodies are just too stubborn to give up. Or maybe, just maybe, they've learned how to suffer with such grace that it becomes indistinguishable from strength. You lie back on your mat, listening to the sounds of donkeys braying, children arguing, and the distant call to prayer. You survived another day. Barely. You wake up early because you have to. Not out of ambition, not out of optimism, but because there's bread at the market, and you need to be in line before the sun even hits the rooftops. Hunger in the Ottoman Empire doesn't come in sweeping famines or sudden collapses, not usually. It comes in pulses. Bread prices rise like the tide, markets empty overnight, and everyone starts talking about whether this is the real one this time. You hope it's not. You've already patched your belt twice. Food insecurity is a quiet terror. You don't starve in a single afternoon, you wither. And when the harvest is bad or the tax quota's too high, bread disappears first. Rice becomes a luxury. Dried fruits? Forget it. Lentils, stretch meals, and cracked wheat gruel becomes dinner. Again and again. You learn to sip vinegar to kill the taste of mouldy bread. You scrape the pot for crusts. You boil weeds your grandfather says are edible, though you're not sure he ever actually ate them himself. The Ottoman economy is built on agriculture, yes, but the granaries aren't in your hands. Wheat flows toward the capital, toward Istanbul, that glittering leviathan, and you're left fighting for the crumbs. In a good year, you might trade some barley for figs or salt. In a bad year, you're standing in line with a sack over your shoulder, praying the baker's fire hasn't gone out. When food riots erupt, and they do, more often than the Sultan would like to admit, you don't join at first. You just watch from a doorway as women throw stones at grain merchants, and janissaries are ordered to restore order. That usually means beating old men senseless and jailing anyone with a raised voice. But eventually your stomach outweighs your fear, and you find yourself in the crowd, chanting, demanding bread that's still warm, bread that won't make your child sick. One famous riot historians still argue if it happened in 1656 or 1660, saw bakers in Istanbul dragged from their stalls by a mob and forced to kneel in the streets while their ovens were smashed with hammers. It didn't fix the grain supply. But it made the people feel, for one night, like someone was listening, until the janissaries arrived and the punishment began. If you live in a rural village, you're somewhat shielded. You grow your own food. You can dry and store it. But if you're in a city, Aleppo, Damascus, Cairo, Istanbul, you're at the mercy of shipments. One storm in the Aegean, one pirate fleet off the coast, and your neighborhood's food supply is cut in half. You watch prices jump. The egg seller doubles his rates. The butcher starts using smaller weights. And the baker always says, "Come back tomorrow." Sometimes you walk the perimeter of your neighborhood just to look at the vendors' stalls. Not to buy, just to see what's there. Dried mulberries, brined olives, walnuts, if you're lucky. The richer markets have saffron, candied quinces, or goat cheese wrapped in leaves. You don't approach. Not unless you want to feel that particular kind of shame that comes from being offered something you can't afford. Then there's the palace. The sultan, God protect him, lives on feasts. Whole lambs, towers of sweets, dishes with names you can't pronounce. His cooks use spices from India, sugar from Egypt, and fish caught the same morning in the Bosporus. If you're a cook in that kitchen, you've seen abundance beyond imagining. But if you're anyone else, those smells are just torture drifting over the city walls. There are rationing systems, some helpful, most not. The government tries to stabilize prices through subsidies, but officials are corrupt. A baker might be ordered to sell bread at a fixed rate, but he'll just make it smaller or mix in sawdust flour to stretch it. You get what you pay for, and what you pay for might not be entirely edible. You hear rumors about food in other empires, that in France, peasants eat cheese and stew with garlic, that in Persia, rice is soft and fragrant and served with apricots, that in India curries burn the tongue and fill the stomach. You wonder if it's true, or if they're poor starved just like you, with different spices. One winter, things get so bad you consider stealing. Not gold, not jewelry, just bread. You spot a baker's stall near the fish market, unattended for a moment. There's a flatbread cooling on the rack, steaming slightly in the cold air. Your stomach twists like a coiled rope. You take a step, then another, and then a boy, younger than you, sprints past and snatches the bread. The baker sees. He roars. People grab the boy. His arm is twisted behind his back, and a copper coin is slapped from his hand. A janissary arrives. The boy cries. Someone mentions amputation. You don't stay to watch what happens next. Instead, you go home. Your wife scrapes the bottom of a pot, pours you a bowl of broth with maybe one chickpea floating inside. You sip it slowly. There's garlic. Just a hint. You savor it like it's the sultan's feast. Still, even in hunger, people endure. A neighbor shares sour yogurt. A baker's apprentice sneaks you a roll now and then. A passing merchant gives your son a fig. These small mercies keep you going. They don't solve the hunger, but they soften it. You go to sleep with your stomach grumbling. You dream of soft bread, of figs warmed by the sun, of meals that don't end in scraping empty bowls. And then morning comes, and the line starts all over again. You've never seen the Sultan, not up close. Maybe a glimpse from a distance during a procession, gold-trimmed robes, a towering turban, guards in armor like sculpted marble, but mostly, the palace exists in your mind as a swirling place of rumors and impossible power. And behind those gates, behind the walls of Topkapi, paranoia breathes like incense through every hallway. You hear the whispers, everyone does, that brothers are strangled with silk cords in the dead of night, that concubines poison each other with opium-laced sweets, that even grand viziers live one wrong word away from execution. You think your life is stressful? Imagine waking up each morning wondering if today's the day your coffee's been laced. The Ottoman court is the heart of the empire, but it doesn't beat softly. The Sultan rules from the palace, but rarely directly. Power is delegated, shifted, buried under layers of viziers, eunuchs, secretaries and mothers, yes, especially the mothers. The Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, often wields more influence than her son, especially if he's young or distracted by hobbies. Historians still argue whether the imperial harem was a den of pleasure or a political war room. Truth is, it was both. It held hundreds of women, most brought from across the empire and beyond. Slavs, Circassians, Greeks, Persians taken as tribute, or bought in markets, converted to Islam, and trained in palace etiquette. Some became mothers to princes. A few became power brokers. Most vanished behind the curtains of embroidered silk, their names never recorded. And then there's Cafés the Cage, not a metaphor, an actual set of gilded apartments where imperial princes are kept, sometimes for years, sometimes decades, waiting to be sultan. You think your room's small? Imagine growing up knowing that the only way out is either the throne or a silk noose. Because when a new sultan takes power, tradition often demands the death of his brothers to avoid civil war, they say. You call it murder, they call it stability. Picture it. A young prince sits in his chamber, listening to the fountain gurgle in the courtyard. He knows his brother has died. Perhaps it happened last night. Perhaps it will happen tomorrow. He eats his meal slowly, each bite tasting faintly of fear. Even if he survives long enough to take the throne, he'll never sleep well again. In this empire, no one at the top is truly safe. Viziers rise fast and fall faster. One year you're sipping sherbet beside the sultan. The next you're in chains, being marched to Yedikule fortress. Accusations don't need proof, only momentum. And justice, well, justice is just whatever the sultan decides it is that morning. Take Sokolu Mehmed Pashawanse, a powerful grand vizier. He survived 3 sultans, built mosques, launched wars, and basically ran the empire for decades. Then one day, in 1579, he was stabbed by a dervish in the palace courtyard. Some say it was political, others call it a religious act. No one really knows. What they do know is this: even the mightiest man in the empire can bleed out in his robes while the pigeons flap overhead. Of course, the sultan himself lives in absolute splendor. His food is inspected by dozens of tasters. His coffee is brewed in gold pots. He bathes in private marble chambers where even the steam seems to bow. But he also trusts no one. His guards are rotated constantly. His advisors compete for favor like cats circling a bowl of milk. And every visit from a foreign ambassador is a performance where the wrong gesture can trigger war. Sometimes, the paranoia gets theatrical. One sultan reportedly insisted that all his meals be prepared by deaf-mute chefs so they couldn't conspire or repeat what they'd overheard. Another forbade mirrors, claiming they allowed evil spirits to enter the palace. Whether these are exaggerated tales or chilling truths, historians still debate. But the fact that people believe them says enough. Even the eunuchs, often seen as neutral servants, are neck-deep in palace intrigue. The chief black eunuch, in particular, oversees the harem and often whispers directly into the sultan's ear. Some of them wield more power than provincial governors. You've seen men bow to them in the street, not from fear, but from desperate respect. You wonder if they sleep any better than the sultan. Back in your own neighborhood, these stories feel like gossip from another planet, but sometimes they ripple outward. A vizier falls, and your local tax collector is replaced overnight. A prince is executed, and soldiers pour into your town to calm unrest. The palace's tremors are felt even in your dusty corner of the empire. And so, you stay quiet. You mind your business. You don't say the sultan's name in public. You don't question why a merchant was arrested last week. You pretend not to notice when a janissary drags someone into an alley and emerges alone. You just keep walking. Because in the Ottoman Empire, survival isn't about power. It's about knowing when to speak, when to bow, and when to vanish into the background like a shadow at sunset. You thought you'd be farming your entire life, tethered to soil and season, the rhythm of rain and harvest. But then the decree came. You've been summoned not to court, not to prison, but to war. And that might actually be worse. You're not a soldier. You're not trained. But the empire needs bodies. And yours happens to be available. Congratulations. You're now part of the Sultan's glorious campaign destination unknown. The Ottomans built their empire through war, and maintaining it required endless soldiers. Some were professionals, janissaries, sipahis, mercenaries, but many were just conscripted peasants with little more than a stick and some sandals. You're called a levant, a kind of irregular auxiliary, though irregular might be putting it too kindly. You have no armor. Your weapon is whatever the quartermaster scrounges up. Sometimes it's a pike, sometimes it's a club, sometimes it's just hope. They send you off in spring, always spring, when the roads are passable and the mud's finally hardened. You march with others boys from your village, a carpenter, a shepherd, a man who once tried to sell sheep's milk wine and still smells faintly like regret. There's no real training, just a few shouted commands, and a man on horseback promising glory. You don't believe him. You march east, or maybe west. The commanders rarely tell you where you're going. It could be the mountains of Persia, or the swamps of Hungary, or the deserts of Mesopotamia. All you know is that it's far, and it's cold at night, or maybe too hot during the day, or sometimes both. Your boots fall apart after the first 100 miles. You wrap your feet in cloth, then grass. You see men collapse on the side of the road, and no one stops to help. Disease walks among you like an invisible officer dysentery, cholera, fevers without names. You bury the dead with your hands because there's no time for shovels. And you stop praying because you're not sure which way God's looking. When you finally arrive at the front, you don't see heroic battles. You see waiting, days of it, digging trenches, reinforcing barricades, watching smoke rise from enemy campfires. Then, without warning, everything explodes into chaos shouting, drum beats, hooves pounding, arrows flying, muskets firing, and the smell, oh, the smell burning flesh, gunpowder, blood-soaked soil. You lose your hearing for a moment and realize it's not from the cannon, it's from your own scream. Historians still argue about the Ottoman military machine how it balanced tradition with innovation, cavalry with artillery, and how it remained a force to be feared for centuries. But from where you're standing clutching a cracked shield and hiding behind a treat doesn't feel glorious. It feels like slaughter on a timetable. There are no medics. If you're wounded, someone might drag you behind the lines, maybe tie cloth around your leg, maybe not. Infection kills more than bullets. You watch a man die from a splinter that turned black within days. Another drinks tainted water and bleeds from the eyes. You start to think surviving this war means never getting touched at all. And yet, you fight, because you must. The man next to you goes down with a scream. You take his pike. It's better than yours. You stab forward without looking. Someone falls. You don't check if they're friend or foe. At night, you dream of home, of bread and olive oil, of goats and firelight. You wake up to frost on your blanket and the scent of unwashed bodies. The officer barks at you to get up. There's another town to seize, another fortress to siege, another 100 miles to walk. Sometimes there's loot, sometimes not. If your side wins, you might be rewarded with trinket daggers, a coin pouch, maybe a copper bracelet stripped from someone who won't be needing it anymore. You take it, not proudly, just because it might buy a meal. And don't forget the weather. Marching through Hungary in winter means snow up to your knees and frozen bread. The fires never get hot enough. Horses die standing. You envy them. Marching through Syria in summer means your tongue swells from thirst and your sweat turns to salt on your skin. You'd kill for a melon, or shade, or death. Then, one day, it ends. The enemy surrenders, or your side retreats. Either way, you're told to go home. Just like that. No medal, no pension, no thanks. You walk the same road back except thinner, more sunburned, with fewer people beside you. You carry a limp now, a cough, a scar on your thigh that still weeps when it rains. When you return to your village, no one cheers. They didn't expect you back. Your wife looks older. Your son doesn't recognize you. You sit down by the hearth and stare at the fire, trying to remember why you left. Later that night, you pick up a wooden toy from your son's hands. You roll it across the floor. He laughs. And for a moment, just a moment, the Empire's wars feel very far away. You wake up to shouting. Not the usual village squabble, not the cries of livestock, but a different kind of sound-tight, tense, punctuated with metal. You peek through a crack in your shutters. The Sipahi is back. And this time, he's not here to collect taxes. Someone in the village has broken a rule, or maybe insulted the wrong man, or maybe just looked like they might one day. That's the thing about Ottoman justice, it isn't blind. It's watching, closely. The Sipahi grabs a man you recognize, a potter. Quiet, barely spoke unless asked. They say he's hiding something, maybe unpaid dues or subversive books. They drag him to the square. No trial, no defense. He's lashed 30 times with a cane as thick as your finger. He doesn't scream, not really, just folds in on himself. The crowd watches, silently, like they're pretending not to be there. Justice in the Ottoman Empire isn't about fairness. It's about control. You follow the kanun, the sultan's secular law. You follow the Sharia, the religious law. You follow the local judge, the imam, the aga, and the provincial governor, all of whom might disagree with each other. But one thing is consistent. You don't want to be noticed. Ever. The punishment system is creative. Theft could be a hand cut off, or lashes, or exile, or forced labor. Depends who you stole from. Insulting an official? That could be branding, or hanging, or simply vanishing overnight. Historians still argue whether the law code of Suleiman the Magnificent was meant to standardize justice or just make the punishment sound poetic. Spoiler: the poetry doesn't help when it's your feet over the fire. Even minor offenses get weirdly specific punishments. Selling underweight bread? You might be paraded through the streets with your faulty scale tied around your neck. Playing dice? The dice are confiscated, and you're fined, or flogged, or both. Running a tavern without a license? Your shop's destroyed, and your wines poured into the street while passers-by are encouraged to jeer. If you're really unlucky, you end up on a galley. The Ottoman Navy always needs rowers, and criminal labor is a convenient way to fill the benches. You're chained to a bench, given barely enough water, and forced to row through the Aegean sun or winter storms. You row until your hands bleed, then keep rowing. The man next to you dies mid-stroke. No one stops to remove him. Eventually, the ship pulls into port, and his body is tossed into the sea like rotten fruit. Some punishments are theatrical. Public hangings in the square, beheadings before the palace gate. Impalement? Rare, but real. The goal is always deterrence. You're meant to see what happens when someone steps out of line. You're meant to feel the empire's breath on your neck. And it works. You mind your manners. You bow deeper. You say, "Yes, Aga," and "Yes, Bey," and never ask why. But what happens when the punishment's a mistake? When the accusation is false? When someone with power decides you're guilty before you open your mouth? There's no appeal. Not really. You can bribe a judge. You can beg an imam. You can write a petition to the palace if you're feeling particularly delusional. But mostly, you just take the blow and try to stay alive long enough for the next injustice to hit someone else. You remember a story told by an old neighbor about a merchant accused of hoarding grain. He swore he wasn't, showed his books, offered the grain as proof. The officials took it, declared it insufficient, then fined him anyway. He was beaten, jailed, and released a week later with a warning: generosity is safer than protest. He moved to Aleppo and never spoke of grain again. And there's the hypocrisy. You see it every day. A local aga breaks rules, openly throws lavish parties during Ramadan, charges illegal interest, grabs land from widows. No one dares stop him. Why? Because he has a cousin in the janissaries, a brother in the palace, and 36 favors owed by local judges. You get arrested for carrying too much salt. Yet the empire believes it is just. It points to its law codes, its scholars, its balance between Sharia and Qanun. It boasts of its Qadis, the judge trained in theology and law, meant to act as moral compasses for the realm. And in some cities, they do. A Qadi in Bursa once ruled against a high-ranking officer for beating a farmer. The officer was fined, the farmer compensated. People still talk about it like it was a miracle. But in your town? The Qadi plays chess with the tax collector on Fridays and hasn't ruled against an official since you were a child. He has a nice house. You walk past it every week and wonder what justice tastes like from that side of the wall. Still, you play your role. You nod. You obey. You keep your prayer kiyat and your opinion kite. You teach your children to stay out of trouble, to agree with whatever the man with the stick says, and to always carry an extra coin just in case someone needs a little incentive to forget what they saw. The potter in the square recovers eventually. Kind of. He walks with a limp now. Doesn't speak much. His pots wobble. People still buy them, mostly out of pity. You nod at him when you pass. He doesn't nod back. And really, can you blame him? You've heard stories of the harem since you were a child, whispers of silk-clad women, lounging on velvet cushions, dancing to the sound of lutes, bathed in perfumes and luxury. Maybe, you thought, it was paradise behind those high walls. But now that you're older, and you've spoken with a merchant who once delivered cloth to the inner palace, you understand what the harem really is. Not a dream, but a cage. Et golden embroidered, perfumed prison. You're not in it, of course. You're a man, and the imperial harem is forbidden ground. Even palace officials step lightly near its gates. But imagine, for a moment, that you're one of the women inside, because that's where the real politics churn, where power and fear hold hands like old lovers, and life there is anything but easy. The harem houses hundreds of women, concubines, wives, servants, musicians, scribes. Most didn't choose this life. They were taken as slaves, offered as tribute, or bought in markets stretching from Venice to Tabriz. Circassians, Georgians, Slavs, Persians, they arrive young, barely more than girls, stripped of family and identity, renamed, reclothed, and reprogrammed. You're one of them now. You've been trained to walk, talk, bow, smile, and serve in ways that would impress a sultan. You learn poetry, music, etiquette, but every lesson is also a warning. Make a mistake, and you're punished. Displease a senior consort, and you might find your bathwater mysteriously cold for weeks or worse, your name scratched from the favoured list. The goal? To rise. If you catch the sultan's eye, you might become a grandeur favourite. If you bear him a son, your rank soars, but with status comes risk. Other women will hate you, plot against you. Poisoned sherbet is a real threat. One sip too sweet, and you might not wake up again. Historians still argue whether the 16th century consort Mahidevran really orchestrated a rival's death using scented powder, or if that tale was just gossip gone rogue. Either way, women in the harem slept with one eye open. The Valide Sultanthi, Sultan's mother, is the highest power in the harem, and sometimes in the entire empire. She controls access to her son, oversees appointments, even corresponds with foreign rulers. A single word from her can elevate end you. You learn quickly to flatter without grovelling, to speak softly but be heard, and to never, ever trust anyone. Some days, you don't see daylight. The windows are high and narrow, built to keep eyes out and voices in. The gardens are lovely, but monitored. Your outings are rare and orchestrated. Even within the palace, you're watched by eunuchs, by other concubines, by servants who report whispers for an extra silver coin. And those eunuchs? They wield more power than you thought possible. Especially the Kislar Agassi, the chief black eunuch, who manages everything within the harem walls. He's the gatekeeper to the sultan's private world. He chooses which concubines are presented, which letters reach the sultan's eyes, which whispers are allowed to echo in his ears. Some women accept the cage and carve out comfort, others scheme, and a few very few ascend to power that rivals any man. Hurrem Sultan, the famed wife of Suleiman the Magnificent, began as a concubine. She bore multiple children, became his legal wife an enormous scandal and influenced imperial policy for decades. People still debate whether her rise was love, cunning, or both. Either way, she turned her cage into a throne. But for every Hurrem, there are 100 nameless women who lived and died behind silken veils, their faces forgotten, their stories lost to dust. You don't get a headstone in the harem. You get a footnote, if that. And life inside isn't just about hierarchy, it's about monotony. You wake, you dress, you wait. You embroider, you rehearse music, you recite verses. Occasionally there's a celebration: birthdays, festivals, circumcision feasts for princes. You smile and twirl and pretend not to notice the side glances. Romance? That's a fantasy. Affection might happen between concubines, between servants, but it's dangerous. Your property. Falling in love means risking everything. If discovered, you're punished. Hard. One tale tells of a eunuch and a concubine who fell in love and tried to flee the harem. They were caught, paraded through the courtyard in chains, and executed at dawn. It might be a cautionary myth, or it might be real. No one's sure. But you remember it every time someone touches your hand for a beat too long. You sometimes look out the narrow window slits and see the sky. You dream of markets, of music in the streets, of the smell of lamb roasting over a wood fire. You wonder what your old name was. You wonder if anyone out there remembers you. Back outside, we imagine these women as pampered. Cushions, jewellery, leisure. But we forget. Leisure without freedom is a trap. Cushions can smother, jewels can weigh heavy, and even paradise, without choice, becomes a nightmare you cannot wake from. You tell your daughter not to dream of the palace. Better to marry the baker's son and argue over flour than to sit on a cushion and never see the world. The harem glitters, Yes, but it gleams with sorrow. And in the empire, nothing shines brighter than a cage polished daily by ambition and fear. You're walking through the marketplace when you hear it, the deep, syncopated beat of war drums, steady as a heartbeat but louder, more urgent. The janissaries are marching. At first you assume it's a parade, another sultan's feast, or a ceremonial inspection, but then you see their faces unsmiling, rigid, armor half-fastened, and the mood turns thick. This isn't a performance. This is a protest. And when janissaries protest, things burn. The janissaries were once the pride of the Ottoman military light infantry, raised through the Devshirme, loyal only to the Sultan. But things have changed. They've become a power unto themselves, more union than army, more mob than regiment. They still train, still march, but now they also own shops, run black market rings, and demand raises every time the wind changes direction. And when they don't get what they want, well, then they revolt. You remember your uncle whispering about the time in 1622 when the janissaries murdered Sultan Osman II. Yes, murdered the Sultan. Historians still debate whether Osman truly intended to disband them or just reform their bloated ranks. But either way, they dragged him from his palace and strangled him. Not with ceremony, not with grace. They killed the man who was supposed to be Allah's shadow on earth, and they didn't even flinch. After that, the empire never felt the same again. You clutch your coat tighter and slide into a shadowed doorway. You don't want to be mistaken for a target, or worse, a bystander. When janissaries riot, they don't just strike at politicians. They sack markets, loot bakeries, torch granaries. That was the price the empire paid for letting them grow too powerful its own sword, now turned inward. They light torches, they chant, they march toward the divan square, demanding back pay, fresh meat, and the removal of a vizier who apparently insulted their honor. You're not sure what he said, but you're very sure it won't end with a handshake. The palace tries to respond, usually too slowly. Sometimes they appease the janissary escoin, gifts, promotions. Other times they resist, and it spirals into chaos. This time, the guards retreat. The mob surges forward. You hear glass break. You hear a shopkeeper scream. Then a warehouse erupts in flame. You try not to look, but you do. You always do. The thing about janissary revolts is that they're both feared and oddly accepted. People talk about them like storms. Another uprising, they'll say, shaking their heads while checking for scorch marks on their shutters. You get used to the idea that the same men who guard the empire by day might raise your street by night. And if you live in a neighborhood where they're stationed, it's worse. You see them off-duty drunk, brash, arrogant. They swagger through the alleys, taking what they want, confident that no one will stop them. Because who would? Who could? The guards are the problem. There's no higher authority to run to. You once saw a janissary knock over a spice merchant's cart because he didn't like the smell. The merchant bowed and apologized. You've heard of the auspicious incident, not yet, but you will, decades later. In 1826, Sultan Mahmud II finally had enough. He ordered the janissaries disbanded and brought in modern artillery to make his point. It was swift. It was brutal. It was the end of an era. But you're still living long before that. In your time, they're untouchable. Even the Sultan fears them. You've seen the royal guard increase after a riot, seen messengers race between the palace and the janissary barracks like bees around a disturbed hive. Sometimes, a vizier is sacrificed, fired, imprisoned, or worse, just to calm things down. Heads roll to stop fists from flying. And yet, the janissaries aren't universally hated. Some protect their neighborhoods. Some bring order when the official law fails. They're not just soldiers. They're also neighbors, landlords, patrons of mosques. One helped your cousin find work. Another paid for a water fountain in your district. It's never simple. No one is ever just one thing in the empire, not even its angriest men. But right now, in the smoke of this latest uprising, simplicity returns. Fire bad, screaming worse. You run, not fast, but carefully too fast, and you might attract attention. Too slow and you might become debris. You duck into a shop where others huddle. The air smells of cumin and fear. You hear boots pass. You hear a door shatter. Then silence. Then, mercifully, footsteps retreating. Hours later, you emerge. The streets are scorched. A merchant's awning is gone. Someone's goat wanders around dazed, trailing a charred rope. The janissaries are gone, back to their barracks. For now, the empire keeps moving, like nothing happened. But you know it did, and it will again. Because in the Ottoman Empire, peace is always just a lull between rebellions. And the louder the drums, the more certain you are that breakfast tomorrow will taste like smoke. You've always kept your head down. That's what your father taught you. Stay quiet, follow the rules, don't draw attention. But even silence won't save you in the empire's surveillance net. Whether you're Muslim, Christian, or Jew, someone's always listening, someone's always watching. And one careless word can turn an ordinary afternoon into a disaster that unravels your whole life. Religious diversity is one of the empire's defining features, sure. The Ottomans are proud of their millet system, a kind of bureaucratic harmony, where communities govern themselves under the umbrella of Ottoman law. Muslims follow Sharia and Qanun. Christians and Jews have their own courts, their own schools, their own taxes. It sounds ideal. Historians sometimes even call it pluralism ahead of its time. But that's the view from above. Down where you live, it feels a lot more like walking a tightrope with a blade under it. You're a Muslim, and so you're technically favoured, but not if you're poor, not if you speak out, not if someone with more connections decides to ruin your day. You've seen neighbours disappear for comments barely louder than a whisper. The governor is lazy. The taxes are impossible. The sultan's not so wise anymore. Gone. Just like that. If you're a Christian or a Jew, things are trickier still. You pay the jizya, the head tax that marks you as a non-Muslim subject. It's collected annually and often arbitrarily. You line up, coins in hand, and hope the local collector isn't in a mood. One Christian cobbler in your district was forced to pay double last year because someone claimed he'd raised his eyes too proudly at the taxman. That's all it took. And your clothing? It marks you. Laws regulate who wears what. Some Jews wear distinctive headgear. Some Christians aren't allowed bright silks. The rules shift, depending on the century and the region, but the message never does. Stay in your place. Still, many communities flourish Armenians as jewelers, Greeks as doctors, Jews as financiers. They're useful, respected even, but never quite safe. One bad harvest, one military defeat, and suddenly rumours start swirling. They poisoned the wells. They collaborated with the enemy. They profit while we starve. The empire fans these rumours when it suits, then snuffs them when convenient. Your neighbour is a Christian. You share bread sometimes. His wife taught your daughter to embroider. But during the last war, when the army passed through, a soldier accused him of hiding silver crosses. His house was searched. Nothing found. Still, the doors stayed broken for weeks. No apology came. You offered help. He refused. You haven't spoken since. And then there's the imams, the qadis, the preachers, men of God, yes, but also men of politics. A sermon might carry a message meant for the ears of the local governor. A ruling might favour the sultan's opinion more than scripture. You attend mosque every Friday, but you've learned to listen between the words. When a certain verse is repeated, you know it's not about faith, it's about obedience. You remember the scandal of 1671, an imam in Edirne accused of heresy for suggesting a softer interpretation of zakat laws. Historians still argue whether it was theological or just political, but the outcome was swift, stripped of title, imprisoned, replaced by someone more agreeable. People stopped talking about him. His books were burned, his name erased from records. The message was clear. In the coffee house, conversations turn cautiously. Men speak in coded phrases. The harvest has ears, one says. The moonlight favours silence, says another. You all laugh, but your eyes flick to the doorway. The empire uses Mubir informant spade or threatened or simply eager to curry favour. They could be anyone. A beggar, a merchant, your cousin. And God forbid you're suspected of sedition or blasphemy. You might face a tribunal, or not. Sometimes you just disappear. A knock on the door at night, a silent ride in a covered cart, and then nothing. No trial, no sentence, just nothing. You once knew a man accused of mocking a mufti. Not loudly, not even publicly. He's gone now. His wife sells herbs by the well. She doesn't look anyone in the eye. Even festivals are policed. You celebrate Eid with food and lanterns but carefully. Too much noise? That's a fine. Too many guests? A violation. If you're Christian, your Easter procession requires permission, and it can be revoked with no reason. Sometimes they grant it, just to spy on who attends. You hear about secret gatherings, Sufi circles chanting in candlelit chambers, Christians holding midnight masses in basements, Jewish scholars teaching hidden texts by lamplight. These things aren't exactly illegal, but they're not encouraged either. The empire prefers everything visible, sortable, documented. Mystery makes it nervous. Still, you endure. You learn to live in the spaces between fear and routine. You teach your children when to speak and when not to. You coach your son to nod politely when soldiers walk by. You tell your daughter never to repeat anything she hears at the well. And one day, you find yourself at a wedding, a mixed gathering, surprisingly approved. Muslim, Christian, Jew. There's music. There's food. For a moment, it feels like the empire's promise. Different people, sharing life under one roof. Then a shadow falls across the doorway. A soldier. Just passing, he says. Just watching. The music falters. Laughter dims. The shadow lingers. And though he eventually walks on, the air never quite returns to what it was. Because in the Ottoman Empire, no matter your faith, your real religion is survival, and your holiest prayer is silence. The sky is pink with dust and smoke as you stand by the fountain, watching water trickle into a cracked basin. It's not the end of the world, just another Tuesday. A little flood in the street, a missing roof tile, maybe a cousin's house swallowed by fire. You barely flinch anymore, because in the Ottoman Empire, disaster isn't rare, it's routine. You survive one crisis just in time for the next. Plague, fire, flood, each one dances through your life like a returning guest. The plague is the quietest. It starts with a cough, a fever, then a house sealed from the outside. Red marks daubed on the doors. No visitors allowed. If you live in a port city, you've learned the pattern. First, a merchant ship arrives with a sick crew. Then a cluster of deaths in a crowded district. Then the rumors. Then the panic. Markets close. Guards patrol. Entire neighborhoods fall silent, broken only by the sound of cartwheels carrying the dead. The government has a system. They impose quarantines, close city gates, fumigate buildings with vinegar and herbs. Historians still debate how effective any of it was. But it makes people feel like something is being done. You wear amulets, burn scented wood. You avoid anyone with a pale face and a too quiet cough. It doesn't always work. You've buried friends, neighbors, cousins. The graveyards fill fast. Then there's fire. If you live in Istanbul or any big city, you know fire like an old enemy. The buildings are wooden. The alleys are narrow. Hearths are never quite extinguished. One dropped oil lamp, and half the district lights up like a tinderbox. There are fire brigadestulum with buckets and long-handled pumps. They arrive shouting and sweating, but they're usually too late. You've watched entire streets disappear in a single night. Embers raining from the sky like judgment. There was a massive fire in 1660. People still talk about it. It destroyed over 280,000 homes along with countless shops, warehouses, and mosques. The city glowed for days. Some said you could see the flames from across the Bosphorus. Some claimed it was divine punishment. Others just shrugged. That's Istanbul, they said. And the floods? Less flashy, but just as cruel. Spring rains turn roads into rivers. Mountainsides crumble. If you live in a valley, you know how fast water can climb your walls. You've seen entire harvests drown. You've stood in knee-high sludge, trying to salvage grain while frogs leap past your ankles. Once, your roof collapsed mid-storm. You and your wife sat under a blanket, soaked to the skin, waiting for the thunder to finish arguing with the earth. The empire tries to help sometimes. After a disaster, you might receive relief grain, or tax delays, or government teams assessing the damage. But it's inconsistent. One flood gets a royal proclamation and a caravan of aid. Another gets a shrug and a promise to address it next season. More than once you've rebuilt your house with your own hands, using scavenged wood and borrowed nails. And if you think that's the worst of it, think again. Earthquakes, locusts, blizzards. A hailstorm once flattened your uncle's orchard in an hour. He stared at the ground afterward like he'd seen the sky personally insult him. Even the grapes hate us, he muttered. The problem isn't just the disasters, it's how easily they're weaponized. If a city burns, someone will blame the Greeks. or the Armenians, or the janissaries, or a poor woman accused of sorcery. The mob doesn't wait for proof. You've seen the aftermath shops smashed, churches defaced, people beaten. There's always someone convenient to blame. Once, a mosque collapsed during a minor quake. Word spread that it was cursed. Then someone said it was built on land stolen from a Christian monastery. 3 days later, the Christian district was on fire. No one was punished. The imam called it divine correction. You grow up learning to prepare for disaster like it's weather. You stash grain in a sealed jar. You hide savings in a cloth pouch under a stone. You keep your goats tethered high in the barn so they don't drown. And you memorize exit routes not just from your house, but from your whole town. Because sometimes it's not nature that's the problem, it's the reaction. When disaster strikes, law becomes soft clay. Soldiers loot under the excuse of order. Judges disappear. The Sultan sends word, but it's always late, always vague. By the time the officials arrive, the worst damage is already done. Still, somehow, people endure. Your neighbour's bakery burned down last winter. He rebuilt it with help from everyone on the block. A widow on your street lost 3 children to the plague. She still brings sweets to neighbourhood weddings. You once saw a child collecting fallen bricks to help repair a mosque wall. When you asked why, he said, "It looked sad." Resilience becomes your daily prayer. You wake up expecting the worst, and when it doesn't come, you call it a blessing. Tonight, the air smells like smoke again. Not thick, not urgent, just enough to remind you. You look up at the sky dark but calm. You listen. No screams, no boots, just the wind. You exhale and settle into sleep, knowing it might not last. In the Ottoman Empire, safety is never permanent. It's only borrowed. You wake to the sound of coughing in the courtyard, not yours this time, but someone else's, harsh and hacking. It's a reminder that you're still alive, which counts for something. But things are changing. You can feel it in the air, see it in the way people speak in hushed tones, eyes darting toward the palace gates. The empire is tired. Everyone is tired. And you're surviving inside a world slowly falling apart at the seams. The Ottoman Empire, for all its power and majesty, is beginning to rot from within. You've lived long enough to notice it. The roads are more broken, the taxmen more desperate, the officials more corrupt. Prices rise, wages vanish, and no one seems to know who's in charge anymore. Or maybe they know and just don't care. You remember when the bathhouse used to be open every evening. Now it's locked more than it's not. You remember when the call to prayer was clear and bold. Now the muezzin's voice cracks with age and weariness. Even the city pigeons seem quieter, like they've noticed the tone shift. You see soldiers grumble instead of march. The janissaries are restless again, demanding more silver, more meat, more privilege. They no longer fear the sultan, they mock him. Historians will one day argue whether this decline began with military defeats, inflation, overexpansion, or simply time itself. But for you, the answer is simpler. Everything feels heavier now, slower, crumbling. Corruption isn't even hidden anymore. A man with no education becomes a tax collector. Overnight, this cousin knows someone at the palace. Your neighbour is fined for having a roof that casts too much shade. Another is forced to bribe an official just to keep his shop sign. You used to dream of moving up, owning a little plot of land, maybe becoming a small trader. Now your only dream is to make it through the month with your dignity intact. Foreign merchants are everywhere. Frenchmen, Venetians, Austrians. They bring strange goods and stranger attitudes. Some locals say they're the future. Others mutter that they're parasites, draining the empire's lifeblood. You don't know what to believe. You just know their coins seem to stretch farther than yours. Even religion, the one solid thing, begins to blur. Preachers give conflicting sermons. One warns of the West's moral decay. Another quotes Latin philosophers. Your son asks why scholars can't agree on how to interpret a verse. You don't answer. You just tell him to listen respectfully and never question publicly. Not in this world. And still, despite all this, life continues. That's the cruel magic of decline. It's not sudden. It's slow, creeping, quiet. You still go to the market. You still mend your clothes. You still nod to the water seller. But under it all, there's a tension like the empire itself is holding its breath, hoping no one notices the cracks in its foundation. Your friends say they feel it too. The shoemaker's leather supply keeps shrinking. The potter's kiln broke months ago, and no one will help him fix it. The baker now sells half loaves at full price. You all laugh about it, but the laughter is dry and hollow. One afternoon you pass by the local courthouse and see a crowd gathered. A young man is pleading his cases. Field was taken by an official's cousin. The judge nods, smiles, dismisses him with a wave. No trial, no justice. Just another reminder that power no longer even pretends to care. There are whispers new of rebellion, of reform, of foreign plots. Some dream of restoring the empire's greatness. Others just want a full stomach. You try not to get involved. You sweep your doorstep. You feed the chickens. You keep your opinions quiet. That's how you've survived this long. And yet, something aches inside you. A slow-burning frustration that no amount of warm bread or whispered prayers can quite smother. You've given everything to this empire. Your taxes, your sons, your labor, your silence. And what has it given back? A life spent dodging punishment, fearing change, watching rot spread in marble palaces while peasants drown in mud. There's a story about a town far east, where the mayor declared himself independent for a week before being dragged off in chains. You wonder if he regretted it. You wonder if he ever felt free. The sky darkens again. Not from smoke this time, just the usual twilight. A breeze moves through the streets, lifting dust from between the cobblestones. You sit on a step, watching a cat groom itself beside a cracked wall. In the distance, a muezzin calls for evening prayer. His voice trembles. You close your eyes and let the sound wash over you. You are still here, still breathing, still holding on. And tomorrow, well, tomorrow you'll rise with the sun and do it all over again. Because in the Ottoman Empire, the real strength wasn't in the palaces or armies. It was in people like you, enduring every injustice, every fire, every plague, every insult with nothing but stubborn hope and a spine made of quietly bent iron. The streets are quiet now. The fires are out. The drums have faded. In the dark, the empire seems still. You hear the low rustle of leaves. A dog barks distantly. Then nothing. Just the creak of wood. The occasional flap of wings in the rafters. A lull. A pause between centuries. You shift beneath your blanket. The air is cooler. The chaos of the day is done. And no matter how harsh life was in the Ottoman Empire, you're here now, resting, safe, detached. Just a quiet listener with your eyes closed and your breath steady. You remember the stories, the taxes, the wars, the betrayals, the narrow escapes. You remember the firelit bazaars and the echoing footsteps in palace halls. But all that is far away, no receding like a tide. You're not running from plague. You're not waiting in bread lines. You're not dodging soldiers or bribes or broken justice. You're here, in the stillness of night, where history can't touch you. Let it all fadder sultans and shadows, silk cages and sharpened blades. Let the empire drift back into memory. You don't need to carry it anymore. Breathe in, breathe out. You're safe now. Tomorrow will come. But for now, just rest. Good night.